all this she possessed the simplicity of true wisdom, and the literal communicative disposition which I have generally remarked in intelligent old ladies knowing in the concerns of their neighborhood. Her information, however, did not extend far back into antiquity. She could throw no light upon the history of the Boar's Head from the time that Dame quickly espoused the valiant pistol until the great fire of London, when it was unfortunately burnt down. It was soon rebuilt and continued to flourish under the old name and sign until a dying landlord, struck with remorse for double scores, bad measures, and other iniquities which are incident to the sinful race of publicans, endeavored to make his peace with heaven by bequeathing the tavern to St. Michael's Church, Crooked Lane, toward the supporting of a chaplain. For some time the vestry meetings were regularly held there, but it was observed that the old Boar never held up his head under church government. He gradually declined and finally gave his last gasp about 30 years since. The tavern was turned into shops, but she informed me that a picture of it was still preserved in St. Michael's Church, which stood just in the rear. To get sight of this picture was now my determination, so, having informed myself of the abode of the sexton, I took my leave of the venerable chronicler of Eastcheap, my visit having doubtless raised greatly her opinion of her legendary lore, and furnished an important incident in the history of her life. It cost me some difficulty and much curious inquiry to ferret out the humble hangers-on to the church. I had to explore Crooked Lane and divers little alleys and elbows and dark passages with which this old city is perforated like an ancient cheese or a worm-eaten chest of drawers. At length I traced him to a corner of a small court surrounded by lofty houses, where the inhabitants enjoy about as much of the face of heaven as a community of frogs at the bottom of a well. The sexton was a meek, acquiescing little man of a bowing, lowly habit, yet he had a pleasant twinkling in his eye, and, if encouraged, would now and then hazard a small pleasantry, such as a man of his low estate might venture to make in the company of high church-wardens and other mighty men of the earth. I found him in company with the deputy organist seated apart, like Milton's angels, discoursing no doubt on high doctrinal points, and settling the affairs of the church over a friendly pot of ale. For the lower class of English seldom deliberate on any weighty matter without the assistance of a cool tankard to clear their understandings. I arrived at the moment when they had finished their ale and their argument, and were about to repair to the church to put it in order. So, having made known my wishes, I received their gracious permission to accompany them. The church of St. Michael's, Crooked Lane, standing a short distance from Billingsgate, is enriched with the tombs of many fishmongers of renown, and as every profession has its galaxy of glory and its constellation of great men, I presume the monument of a mighty fishmonger of the olden time is regarded with as much reverence by succeeding generations of the craft as poets feel on contemplating the tomb of Virgil, or soldiers the monument of a Marlborough or Turenne. I cannot but turn aside while thus speaking of illustrious men to observe that St. Michael's, Crooked Lane, contains also the ashes of that doughty champion William Walsworth, knight, who so manfully clove down the sturdy white Wat Taylor in Smithfield. A hero worthy of honourable blazon, is almost the only Lord Mayor on record famous for deeds of arms, the sovereigns of Cockney being generally renowned as the most pacific of all potentates. The following was the ancient inscription on the monument of this worthy, which unhappily was destroyed in the great conflagration. Here under lieth a man of fame, William Walworth called by name. Fishmonger he was in lifetime here, and twice Lord Mayor as in books appear, who with courage stout and manly might slew Jack Straw in King Richard's sight. For which act done and true extent, the king made him knight incontinent, and gave him arms, as here you see, to declare this fact and chivalry. He left the life the year of our God 1380 odd. An error in the foregoing inscription has been corrected by the venerable Stowe, whereas, saith he, it hath been far spread abroad by vulgar opinion that the rebel smitten down so manfully by Sir William Walworth, the then worthy Lord Mayor, was named Jack Straw and not Wat Sailor. I thought good to reconcile this rash conceived doubt by such testimony as I find in ancient and good records. The principal leaders or captains of the Commons were Wat Sailor as the first man, the second was John or Jack Straw, etc., etc. Stowe's, London. Adjoining the church in a small cemetery, immediately under the back window of what was once the Boar's Head, stands the tombstone of Robert Preston, whilom drawer at the Tavern. It is now nearly a century since this trusty drawer of good liquor closed his bustling career, and was thus quietly deposited within call of his customers. As I was clearing away the weeds from his epitaph, the little sexton drew me on one side with a mysterious air, and informed me in a low voice that once upon a time, on a dark wintry night, when the wind was unruly, howling and whistling, banging about doors and windows and twirling weathercocks, so that the living were frightened out of their beds, and even the dead could not sleep quietly in their graves, the ghost of honest Preston, which happened to be airing itself in the churchyard, was attracted by the well-known call of "Waiter" from the Boar's Head, and made its sudden appearance in the midst of a roaring club, just as the parish clerk was singing a stave from the mere garland of Captain Death, to the discomfiture of sundry train-band captains, and the conversion of an infidel attorney who became a zealous Christian on the spot, and was never known to twist the truth afterwards, except in the way of business. I beg it may be remembered that I do not pledge myself for the authenticity of this anecdote, though it is well known that the churchyards and by-corners of this old metropolis are very much infested with the perturbed spirits, and every one must have heard of the Cock Lane ghost, and the apparition that guards the regalia in the Tower, which has frightened so many bold sentinels almost out of their wits. By all this as it may, this Robert Preston seems to have been a worthy successor to the nimble-tongued Francis, who attended upon the revels of Prince Hal, to have been equally prompt with his anon, anon, sir, and to have transcended his predecessor in honesty. For Falstaff, the veracity of whose taste no man will venture to impeach, flatly accuses Francis of putting lime in his sack, whereas honest Preston's epitaph lands him for the sobriety of his conduct, the soundness of his wine, and the fairness of his measure. The worthy dignitaries of the church, however, did not appear much captivated by the sober virtues of the tapster. The deputy organist, who had a moist look out of the eye, made some shrewd remarks on the abstemiousness of a man brought up among full hogsheads, and the little sexton corroborated his opinion by a significant wink and a dubious shake of the head. As this inscription is rife with excellent morality, I transcribe it for the admonition of delinquent tapsters. It is no doubt the production of some choice spirit who once frequented the Boar's Head. Bacchus, to give the topping world surprise, produced one sober son, and here he lies. Though reared among full hogsheads, he defied the charm of wine and every one beside. O reader, if to justice thou art inclined, keep honest Preston daily in thy mind. He drew good wine, took care to fill his pots, had sundry virtues that excused his faults. You that on Bacchus have the like dependence, Pray copy Bob in measure and attendance. Thus far my researches, though they threw much light on the history of tapsters, fishmongers, and lord mayors, yet disappointed me in the great object of my quest, the picture of the Boar's Head Tavern. No such painting was to be found in the church of St. Michael's. Marry and amen, said I. Here endeth my research. So I was giving the matter up with the air of a baffled antiquary, when my friend the sexton, perceiving me to be curious in everything relative to the old tavern, offered to show me the choice vessels of the vestry which had been handed down from remote times when the parish meetings were held at the Boar's Head. These were deposited in the parish club-room, which had been transferred on the decline of the ancient establishment to a tavern in the neighborhood. A few steps brought us to the house, which stands number 12 Miles Lane, bearing the title of the Mason's Arms, and is kept by Master Edward Honeyball, the bully rock of the establishment. It is one of those little taverns which abound in the heart of the city and form the center of gossip and intelligence of the neighborhood. We entered the bar-room, which was narrow and darkling, for in these close lanes but few rays of reflected light are enabled to struggle down to the inhabitants, whose broad day is at best but a tolerable twilight. The room was partitioned into boxes, each containing a table spread with a clean white cloth ready for dinner. This showed that the guests were of the good old stamp and divided their day equally, for it was but just 1 o'clock. At the lower end of the room was a clear coal fire, before which a breast of lamb was roasting. A row of bright red brass candlesticks and pewter mugs glistening along the mantelpiece, and an old-fashioned clock ticked in one corner. There was something primitive in this medley of kitchen, parlor, and hall that carried me back to earlier times and pleased me. The place indeed was humble, but everything had the look of order and neatness which bespeaks the superintendence of a notable English housewife. A group of amphibious-looking beings, who might be either fishermen or sailors, were regaling themselves in one of the boxes. As I was a visitor of rather higher pretensions, I was ushered into a little misshapen back room, having at least 9 corners. It was lighted by a skylight, furnished with antiquated leathern chairs, and ornamented with the portrait of a fat pig. It was evidently appropriated to particular customers, and I found a shabby gentleman in a red nose and oilcloth hat seated in one corner, meditating on a half-empty pot of porter. The old sexton had taken the landlady aside, and with an air of profound importance imported to her my errand. Dame Honeyball was a likely, plump, bustling little woman, and no bad substitute for that paragon of hostesses, Dame Quickly. She seemed delighted with an opportunity to oblige, and hurrying upstairs to the archives of her house, where the precious vessels of the parish club were deposited, she returned, smiling and curtsying, with them in her hands. The first she presented to me was a japanned iron tobacco box of gigantic size, out of which I was told the vestry had smoked at their stated meetings since time immemorial, and which was never suffered to be profaned by vulgar hands or used on common occasions. I received it with becoming reverence. But what was my delight at beholding on its cover the identical painting of which I was in quest. There was displayed the outside of the Boar's Head Tavern, and before the door was to be seen the whole convivial group at table, in full revel, pictured with that wonderful fidelity and force with which the portraits of renowned generals and commodores are illustrated on tobacco boxes for the benefit of posterity. Lest, however, there should be any mistake, the cunning limner had warily inscribed the names of Prince Hal and Falstaff on the bottom of their chairs. On the inside of the cover was an inscription nearly obliterated, recording that this box was the gift of Sir Richard Gore for the use of the vestry meetings at the Boar's Head Tavern, and that it was repaired and beautified by his successor, Mr. John Packard, 1767,